We are building the laptop store project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. In the last video, we saw a kind of like a big picture view of how we populate the laptop list, the inventory of laptops, let's say. Having done so, we are going to write some code in this video. But let's just, for recollection, remember we are going to create a master dictionary, which is basically sort of the database from where all these values for these laptops will come from. The specs of interest are brand, model, CPU, and so on. And as a result, the keys on this dictionary are going to be brands, models, prices, basically plural of brand, plural of model, and so on. Now, doing this is actually quite straightforward, and it illustrates to us yet another way of creating. Now, doing this is actually quite straightforward. In fact, doing so illustrates to us yet another way of creating and populating dictionary. In fact, all we need to do is to create an empty dictionary. So I just go and say, well, master, let's say master dict, say for master dictionary. I just give it 2 curly brackets. Now this creates an empty dictionary. But then, just like previously, just like we saw previously, we can just keep adding items to this, the key value pairs. So I can just go and say, well, master dict, for example, let's say brands. Remember, specs is brands, so I just do brands over here. Now in this case, I'm picking up brands from a list, so I'm just going to say, well, let's use, let's say wdel, let's say let's say Lenovo, Acer, maybe Asus. Obviously all of this has to be strings, and let's say WHP. Now again, previously I've mentioned this disclaimer that these brand names are given the way they are, just to kind of create a relatability, but other than that, these are fictitious names. We can go ahead and create more let's say lists. So I just go and say, well, master dict, for example, let's say models. Now here I'm just keeping something, let's say simple, so I just call it, let's say AAA, perhaps say BBB, and say maybe CCC. Now this is again, like I said, just an illustrative idea, but you can be more elaborate about it. So I'm just going to copy this, let's say a few times over. So when I have, let's say, the CPUs, so I can have maybe choice for, let's say, W Intel, let's say i5. I have, let's say, W Intel, say i7, and say W AMD, say Ryzen. Now again, we are creating these names the way we are creating, just to create a bit of a relatability to the whole exercise. Next, I can go and create, for example, the speeds. So what are the speeds that we look at? Well, let's just say, again, say for the sake of illustration, now we will assume, for example, 2 gigahertz. So this is basically the CPU speed. So let's say 3 gigahertz, and let's say 3.5 gigahertz, now 3.5 gigahertz. As I said, it's a good chance for you to also try and understand what all these things mean, because that could be interesting from a computing point of view as well, right? So finally, next, let's say I have RAMs. So for instance, I have, let's say 2 GB, say 4 GB, and say 8 GB of RAM. So I'm going to pick up from, let's say, these 3. Next, let's say we will have, let's say control V, say storages. So storage, I mean, like how much memory capacity do I have on that laptop? So let's say I do storages. So that is going to be, let's say we will use, for instance, 128 GB. Now again, notice I'm using all strings over here, say 256 GB. Let's say 512 GB, and maybe I can even put, given the way things are going these days, maybe let's say 1 TB, which is like 1 terabyte of memory, which is a lot actually. Yeah. Then we have, let's say, some choices for the screen sizes. So screen sizes. Now I will, like I said, somebody will want a small screen. So probably let's say 9-inch. Now this is usually the diagonal size of the screen. Let's say 12-inch. And say a large one, perhaps let's say maybe 14-inch or something, 14.9-inch. Let's say 14.9-inch. And maybe a very, very large screen, so 17-inch. I mean, that will be quite huge for a laptop, but anyway. Yeah. Then finally, we have the prices, perhaps, I mean, certainly a very, very important metric. And I just say, okay, look, let me price this. If we put 3 options for this as well, say INR, say 20,000, INR, let's say INR, let's say 30,000. And INR, let's say 40,000. Now clearly, laptops could be actually more expensive than this. This is sort of the beginning range, I would say, or beginning to medium range. You get more expensive laptops, and you have opportunity here to also specify the currency to be something else. But you get the idea that this master dictionary is where the specs will be picked up from, and when we create the inventory. So let's just see this running. When I run this piece of code, so we have Python 3, let's say -i, and let's say ls-demo.py. This whole code runs. If I look at the master, let's say dict, it is basically a dictionary whose values are all lists. And we can see that, if I look at type, let's say of master, say dict, that is clearly a dictionary. And each of these, for example, if I look at master dict, let's say brands, well, as expected, that is, so if I were to probe this, that tells me the list that is inside this value. So basically, this is a dictionary whose values are all lists. Now, before I wrap up, let me just make very, let's say, explicit a point that is sort of, implicit over here right now. Notice when I use a command, something of the sort, let's say A with 2 curly brackets. In fact, what I have done is to already create a dictionary. So if I look at, let's say, type of A, that is a dictionary. Now, as we have done here, master dict is, let's say, empty. And then I go and fill it all up by, let's say, giving, the key and the values. And that is another way of creating dictionaries. Now, I hope you found this interesting. In general, this way of creating, learning Python, where we are building activities that we can relate to, I think is quite something that appeals to you. Do look at our website, www.ybyte.in, because that is how we learn programming at Ybyte. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.